everyone, to this edition of Double Jab with Q. I'm your host, Rich Quinones. We are presented by Caribe Royale Orlando Hotel and Box Lab Promotions. Friday, May 31st, happening at the Convention Center at the Caribe Royale Hotel. Box Lab Promotions presents a Night of Champions, plus the Barrientes twins, Angel and Chavez, are back in action, led by our special guest, the legendary trainer Bob Santos. You can catch the fight exclusively on DAZN. If you live in Orlando area, don't forget to visit Ticketmaster.com. Click on the link below in our show notes for tickets. And Bob, it's great to finally get you on the pod and talk a little sweet science and boxing with you, and appreciate a couple moments, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So, I mean, listen, it's funny when we look at the ebb and flow of fighters, we always have to think of the men or the women behind them, the trainers, the coaching. And I remember years ago, I guess maybe you kind of were able to shed that, conditioning coach kind of moniker, and look at what you've done over the last several years. You go with a guy like the Ghost Robert Guerrera, Lara, your Ring Magazine SI Trainer of the Year. You talk about that grind and the journey, and now finally over the last couple of years to get that type of recognition. What does it mean to you?
Well, it means a lot. Obviously, I've been at this a long time, and to give a little bit of my background and how I've come into the sport. My cousin fought in Louis Molina. Google searched it. He was a hell of a fighter. He was, the first Marine to become an Olympian in 1956. So that'll give you a little background on how long my family's been involved with the sport of boxing. And that being said, when I came into the sport of boxing, 31, 32 years ago in the professional ranks, there was no such thing as a conditioning coach. Like I always tell everybody, you had to do everything. The coach was everything. So, you had to know how to do a little bit of cuts. You had to obviously get your guy ready. You had to make weight, and you had to do all those things. And like anything else, all of a sudden, as this sport is, you know how it is. It was managers and boxers and trainers. Then all of a sudden, it's manager, advisor, and then all of a sudden, it's a strength coach, nutritionist, and cook. And then, so that being said, like if you look at my background, I worked with Hector Lazarago, who was a world champion. I was fortunate to be in the corner with Livingstone Bramwell many, many years ago. Carlos Cruzat, who became the only cruiserweight champ in the history of Chile. I was his head coach for a time. So I've been at this a long, long time, much more than people seem to know. But, in this sport, it is what it is.
Yeah. I mean, listen, and that's the thing, right? Everyone has that backstory and they don't know about the grind. And you alluded to it, right? I mean, you go back to the 60s and 70s, it was a trainer. That was it. We're getting the miles in, right? Your diet is what it is. You're getting your rounds in, your sparring, you're going to hit your road work. Then all of a sudden in the 70s, when we saw the more influx, I think amateur boxing really started to come into its own, so to speak. And these, these young amateurs, whether it was 76, whether it was the 84 team, these guys are fighting 2-3 times a day. But again, it was their trainer. It was their coach. Now, as you alluded to, I think a lot of that has to do with the growth of the sport. But now all these young fighters, think about it, they have their quote entourages. They have a friend of a friend of a friend, and they're latching on. And I'm not a big proponent of that. I think sometimes when you have too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, you spoil the meal.
That's right. And I think, every fighter is different, and what works for one guy may not work for another. And I think that's where I've been fortunate. I was underneath Manny Stewart for a time. Obviously, I spent a lot of years in and around, Freddie Roach's gym at Wild Card. I was under the tutelage of Joe Goosen for many, many years. And so I was able to, pick their brains, pick a little bit from here, pick a little bit from there. I was fortunate to be in the gym with Ronnie Shields for a long time. So I've been around some of the greats, and I was able to pick from each and every one of them and kind of develop my style off of that and what I thought worked or didn't work. And I think one of the fortunate things that I bring to the table with my fighters is I don't try to change their style per se. Let's just add a couple little things here and there. And I think that's been a recipe for success for me and my fighters.
I think the track record speaks for itself. Also, too, the loyal, right? I mean, you're treating them more than just fighters, right? I mean, when you're watching these guys with the struggles and whatnot, and they're making their way through the ranks, the amateurs, the club shows, and then all of a sudden the bigger stage, you're there with them in the beginning and then the middle and then. And I think there's a sense of loyalty which is lost in the sport of boxing, with some managers, with promoters, and with trainers. But you've kind of been able to negate that, and obviously that's why you have strong ties to some of these guys.
Yeah, definitely. Comes to mind. Obviously, Robert Guerrero has been with me since he was 15 years old, and we're still together today. You look at Erislandy Lara, I've been with him, well over a decade. So A lot of these guys that have came and stayed with me, and I think that's a testament to me, myself, the way my parents raised me. Always do the right thing, and when you do that, for the most part, good things are going to happen. If I'm a firm believer, if you plant lemons, don't be surprised when you get lemon trees. So you do the right thing, good things happen.
Yeah, I might have to borrow that one on the air. The legendary trainer Bob Santos, kind enough to join us. Double Jab with Q. We are presented by Caribe Royale Orlando Hotel and Box Lab Promotions. We'll get to that card in a moment. What do you look for in a fighter? I mean, you mentioned that you're not trying to change the fighter, but I think sometimes you almost got to be like this sculptor, right? You want to kind of sculpt them, but you also still want, at the end of the day, let them be their own separate entity. Let there be their own work of art, if you will. But what do you look for in a fighter?
You know, physically, the first thing I like to look at a fighter is his feet. I think if you got great footwork, that's the beginning of a recipe for success. But ultimately, heart, determination, and want. And the reason I say that is I've worked with a lot of Olympians, obviously, and some have panned out and became world champions, and some haven't. But I was fortunate to work with a guy like Hector Lazarago, who didn't have more than 25 amateur fights and became a world champion, right? So heart, determination, is probably first and foremost, and then physically, I like to look at a guy's feet, and I think that enables him to get in and out of spots on angles, and that makes a huge difference. Your first line of defense to me is your feet.
Yeah, it's a great point you bring up, right? And then obviously, if you're coming from a good amateur background, anytime they're throwing that combinations, they're getting right back on that stick. I always look for that. When you look at some of these young fighters that are making their way through the pro ranks, and I believe, and you tell me if I'm off, if you have 45 to 55, 60 plus amateur fights, to me, I look at you as quote pro ready. Is that fair?
Sure. I mean, once you got to realize if you probably have, like you said, 50, 60 amateur fights, how many fights do they probably have that are smokers that are not on the record, right? Per se. But let's just say, for argument's sake, it is just the 50 or 60. Well, if you have 50 or 60 amateur fights, how much have you been in the ring for sparring, for preparing for these fights and things of that nature? So a lot of these guys, they got maybe sometimes even much more in sparring top quality level guys. And in cases of that, that might be even more beneficial than the fight itself, per se. If you get to get in there with a world-class guy and get that type of experience. So definitely you should be, as long as you're physically ready, yeah, you should have the sense and the wherewithal to be able to compete at a professional level for sure.
Yeah, and then conversely, someone will look at, say, like Loma with the, 150, 200 plus, right? You're getting all this ring time as an amateur, and then is it going to hurt your career going forward? But then I can also use the argument, and I love him to death. To me, Mark Breland was one of the greatest amateurs in the world, but
Wow.
doesn't necessarily mean it translates into being a great pro, right? I mean, it's a different
No,
app.
it doesn't. Matter of fact, it's funny you just bring up that name. I was just with Shelly Finkel the other night, Saturday. Obviously, he had Stanionis and I had Mario Barrios, so they were on the card together. And I worked with Shelly for many, many years with a lot of different guys. So it's funny that you just bring up Mark Breland. That's definitely a name out of the past, but definitely one of the greatest amateurs that the United States has ever seen. But again, that always translate to you're going to be the type of pro that like a Pernell Whitaker, obviously.
Yeah, good point, by the way. And Mario, I know that, rebounded was on that the undercard of the Canelo fight over this past weekend, but had those tough losses to Keith Thurman and Tank. I interviewed him right when he had a cup of coffee as a pro when he was a young buck, if you want. I've kind of watched his ascent, but that's one of the other things, right? You look for a guy if he gets knocked out, how are you going to respond, right? That character kind of going forward. I think that makes for a really tough fighter, and that's a fighter that you want to work with and train.
Well, again, I was fortunate to be with him from the beginning. We turned him pro. I was his coach uh, for his head guy all the way up until he became number one in the world. And then they made the decision to go a little bit in a different direction with Virgil. And he's come back to me and reunited, and it feels so good, just like the old song.
That's right.
So we've been undefeated together and since the beginning, and I'm very thankful for that.
Double Jab with Q, the legendary trainer Bob Santos, kind enough to join us. Don't forget, we'll have a couple fighters on that night of champions, and we are presented by Caribe Royale Orlando Hotel and Box Lot Promotions. That bout, that event is going to be May 31st at the Convention Center at the Caribe Royale Hotel. Box Lab Promotions presents a Night of Champions. You got the twins, Barrientes, you got Angel and Chavez. And I was looking at them, I was like, if they don't have a career in boxing, they can be models. I mean, so you look at these two young kids, and I'll tell you, man, a couple things that I look at. You mentioned the footwork, but I also think they respectively pick and choose their spots, if you will, in the ring. They don't really put themselves in harm's way. I know Angel had the one loss, I think it was to Lawson in the fourth round, just got caught, but still 10-1 with 6 knockouts. Chavez, using that height, using that reach, 8-0 with 6 knockouts. What do you like about those two young fighters?
Well, in the case of Angel Barrientes, when he lost to Lawson, he was controlling and dominating the fight, obviously. But at the end of the day, I think he had a wealth of experience and got caught with a good shot. But that's really a guy that just turned 18 years old, a
That's
boy
right.
versus a man, right? And so sometimes, unfortunately, things don't turn out your way. Something like that happens, but learning lesson. I'm sure he'd love to get back in the ring with Lawson anytime, any place as of today. Now that he's becoming a full grown man, I think we'd see a completely different outcome, and we'll see if they ever accept the rematch with that. I highly doubt it, but it is what it is. But I like the way the Twins control range with the jab, control distance. I've been fortunate enough to be around them and their father for a long time, as I used to do camps with Robert Guerrero, and they used to come to the camps and stuff like that when they were kids, and that's how I first met them and discovered them, and been fortunate to manage them up until this point in their career.
I like the fact too that they both respectively start to step up in competition. And that's another thing I look at, right? Because a lot of times you want to ease them in, you kind of want to spoon feed them a little bit, give them that lopsided opponent with the record. But we know boxing, you don't go by box rec. You have to throw the records out the window. But when you start to step up, going against a guy 6, 8 rounds, 13-6, 13-4, 10-2, that tells
Sure.
me more about what the team thinks of the fighter. We kind of already guess where we believe the fighter is going to be, but it tells me what his trainer, his manager, and his promotional team think of him.
Sure. At this point where I think that we're at, with Louis DeCubas Jr., who's my partner, obviously, and Al Heyman, who's an advisor to them, I think we're at a point now, they just need a little bit of activity.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking probably within this next, 2 to 3 fights, and I think within 2 more fights, get this fight out of the way and the 31st, and we'll step them up to 10 rounders. And I think at that point, for 22 pounders, they're big, they're huge. They've been in the ring with everybody. They've been in the ring with, Shakur, Gervonta Davis, Devin Haney. And I think 2 more fights, like I said, let them get a 10 rounder in. And then at that point, I think they're ready to go against any of the 122 pounders, the best guys out there in the division.
You think they'll fill out as well? They're young kids, right?
Sure, yeah, they're big. There's no two ways about it. They're close to 6 foot, so I don't expect them to stay, obviously at 122 pounds, just like with Mario Barrios. When we turned the pro, he was a 22 pounder.
Yeah.
Before you know it, we got, then we were number one in the world at 130. And then obviously we jumped up and won the title at 40.
Yeah.
And we just had a lot of trouble making the weight at 140 in the Gervonta Davis fight. And then obviously, we stepped up to 47. We were able to capture the title at 47.
I still always, this is just me, man. My bias 47. I've always been enthralled by, I mean, just going back, that division, and then 70s and 80s, the middleweights, the heavyweights. I mean,
Of course, that you just named the 3 best divisions, in the
I know, but
history
I
of
know
all
it's
time. It's
I'm
welterweight,
playing with the
middleweight,
chalk,
heavyweight.
right? I know I'm going with the chalk on that. I know it's but it's just what I recall. I mean, I'll still go, and I'll even throw on, like, Dwight Muhammad Qawi the second time in '88 against Evander Holyfield in the Army, right, in Atlanta. To this day, Qawi would sit there and say, he was Evander had to be on something during that fight, right? But you're talking about a cruiserweight, the way he moved around his defense. Like, I'll go Carlos Monzon, I'll go Arguello and Pryor. I like looking at they're great all-time classics, but then I'll drift back and I'll start to look at some obscure bouts. But I've always been enthralled with those divisions that
Oh, me too. Me too. No two ways about it.
were there any fighters that, just growing up as a fan that you enjoyed
Well,
watching?
for me, probably my all-time favorite, Roberto Duran. Just a tremendous, tremendous fighter. backstory. Fortunately for me, I was actually in South Africa. I had Hector Lazaraga defending his world title. Geez, that's got to be back in, I don't know, 98, I guess, or before that. Anyway, and if you look at the box rec, Roberto Duran Jr. made his pro debut on that in Carnival City. We were fighting Cassius Beloy. Actually, no, we had lost the title to Manuel Medina, and we were fighting for the a title with Cassius Beloy, and Roberto Duran Jr. was on that card. And Arishel, who's the sister, she was actually going to make her pro debut, believe it or not, and then she couldn't fight because they found out she was pregnant. And then I don't think
Wow.
she ever ended up fighting. Little
Wow.
backstory there.
That's crazy. Hey, I know I only got you for a couple more moments. Let me just ask you, we see a really good fight like, Garcia and Haiti the other night, and then what transpires with Garcia and, you know, again, the samples, the steroids, the banned substance, what have you.
Okay.
I feel as though sometimes, like we say, we can never have nice things in boxing. I mean, what's your take on that? Do we sit there and say, hey, these fighters know what they're doing, they know what they're putting in their body, they should know what they're putting in their body, just unfortunate, or does it really just put like a black eye on what we thought would have been a really nice weekend in the fight game?
Well, I always try to tell people, I love the sport of boxing. I think the fans of the sport of boxing are the best in the world. It's a tremendous sport. It's one-on-one. It's the ultimate competition. But we have to realize, a lot of times people will knock boxing. They'll say this, that, the other. Hey, at the end of the day, there's some great doctors out there and there's some bad doctors out there. They're prescribing things they know they shouldn't be prescribing because we have the human nature. So there's good people and there's bad people, whether that's in football, basketball, boxing, doctors, husbands, wives. It's the human condition. So we're never going to get away from that. That being said, there's some great people, like I said, in boxing. The other thing is, I'm a big believer that you're innocent till proven guilty. So let it play itself out. And if it turns out to be the case, then it is what it is. As far as if it is positive, right, then to me, it's either, one of two things. You knowingly took it, or somebody gave you something that you didn't know. But at the end of the day, we're grown adults here, and you got to know you're a professional athlete, and you got to have the wherewithal, or the team around you, you would hope, had the wherewithal to make sure that something like this doesn't happen. I talk to my fighters all the time. Of course, I can't be with you 24/7. I try to be with you as much as I can. Like I said, I was under the tutelage of Emmanuel Stewart, so I'm old school. I like my fighter in camp with me for the most part. I want to control as much as I can. Maybe I'm a control freak, whatever it is. I want to see the meals that we're eating. I actually want to go on the runs. I'm old school that type of way, and I want to be involved in as much as possible. That being said, you almost can't be with them 24/7. So you try to get in their mind as much as you can. Hey, be careful what you're taking. Even if you go to a GNC, it may be on the banned substance list. Before you get something, bring it to us. Let them check it out. Let them, send it in to, that's the great thing about VADA. You can put it on the forums. So at the end of the day, if it is 100% positive, then he either took something willingly or somebody gave him something, and you're responsible. And I hope that's not the case. Maybe it's a case of contamination. We'll wait and see how the process plays itself out. But if of those three things, you're responsible for two of them 100%.
Yeah. I mean, I agree wholeheartedly. And I think when you get to a certain point where you're making that type of money, right, and you're in that spotlight and you're well known, you're right. You've got to have the right people around you. You just got to know, uh, none the wiser, so to speak. Like, just, hey, man, what, let me just take a step back. Let me present this to my team. Let me see what's okay. Because ultimately, people are going to come out now, the Monday morning quarterback, and ban him for life and this and easy. But this is boxing. Let's not do the babe in the woods routine, right? Like they said in Goodfellas. Like we know that guys have gotten pinched in the past. We know that fighters have, issues with their gloves. I mean, we can go back. I mean, we can go back to the prior and their gray on what
Well,
was in the
like I said, it's the
right.
human condition. Like,
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. When, you go play at Yankee Stadium you realize there's going to be a lot of lefties in the lineup, and right field is going to be pretty short. It is
Yeah.
what it is going in. Everybody's trying to get an advantage. You know, my brother, who boxed too a little bit in the Marines, but he happened to be a college football coach. You know, when Stanford was going to play against, say, Washington State, the grass would be a little bit shorter. Maybe they had a quicker team. They know they're playing USC, and the
Yeah.
groundskeeper wink, wink.
Yeah.
I think it'd look a lot better on TV with those blades hanging a little bit longer to slow the other team down. So, like I said, with the human condition, everybody's trying to get an edge. The question is, where do you take that? Are you now taking it to a level? Like I said, this isn't track and field. And I think, just me personally, I think it's terrible if you knowingly take something. You know, I just think it's just, and I had Robert Guerrero fight Orlando Salido,
Yeah.
right? And I'll never forget that. Um, After the fight, I told everybody, there's no doubt in my mind this guy's taking drugs. And matter of fact, to give you a backstory, with Shelly Finkel, he says, "Oh, Bob, don't say that. It's going to look like, you're making excuses." I said, "Shelly, I'm not saying that in the public." This was in the locker room after the fight, right? I says, "There's no way to me that Guerrero, who's a huge puncher at 26, I mean, we were wrecking everybody. And then all of a sudden we fight Salido and he throws more. He sets the all-time punch out record. I mean, we hit him with some blistering left hand,
Yeah.
spun him around. He still kept going." I said, to me, that's not natural. Fortunately, he was caught. It was changed over to a no contest, but the damage of that fight can never be done. So to me too, if they find out with some kind of evidence that these people knowingly 100% took it, and it's that kind of credible evidence,
Worse.
I think the suspension needs to be high and long. If they can really find that you truly knowingly did something, not contamination, right? Knowingly did something, and maybe you give a little bit of a step back where the guy wasn't too smart. He had a bad guy in the camp. He wasn't so
But how do we
sure.
know that? You can play,
That's what I'm saying. So it's
he
almost
said, she said.
impossible to know.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible
But
to
let's
know.
just say knowingly, let's just go on. He knowingly knew what he was putting in his body.
Yeah, he went down and we got the receipts where he purchased it
Sure.
from then I think, boy,
What are we talking? We
it's
talking,
got to be a couple years, if not a lifetime ban.
you would go that far, a lifetime ban.
And the reason I say that is, if you could really, it'd be almost impossible to prove that, but
Of
if you could
course.
really only prove that, I think it sets the tone to everybody. You bet, boy, if you get caught, you're done. And the reason I say that is, in track and field, you beat me by 10 yards, 100 yards, 50 yards. Okay, you beat me. It sucks. It hurts my earning power. It hurts this. Maybe it hurts my reputation, but I'm physically still intact. When
Fair
we're in a
point.
combat sport where, these guys are putting their lives on the line,
Yeah.
I think we got to come down super, super hard, especially if we could prove 100% you knowingly took it, you purchased it, they found out about that. I think it's got to be close to a lifetime ban, if not a couple years for sure.
Yeah. I mean, listen, when you bring it up like that and dissect it like that, I mean, you look at the other major sports out there, and remember too, all these other sports at the end of the day, protected by unions, right? I mean,
Sure.
that's the other thing.
And a
And
commissioner
and
who's and that's the difference too, where boxing gets a lot of a black eye, because sometimes a commissioner can unify everything. He
yep.
could take control of everything
Yeah.
and give a much better package of the image of the sport itself. But it's football, basketball, baseball, or anything in life. Like I said, attorneys, I don't care what it is. You got good people and bad
Yeah.
people. They're
Yeah.
fortunate to have a commissioner that can oversee that and package it better. Where in boxing, the beauty of it is it's a worldwide sport. It gives opportunities to people that may not other have, for whether in France, Japan, Venezuela. And that's the greatness of the sport, where a guy can come from Venezuela, come from nothing, come to the United States or wherever it is, or Japan, and get a tremendous opportunity. That's the greatness of our sport. But what it also hurts us is because it's so wide open.
Yeah.
That's the negative part of the
No,
sport.
it's a great point, right? And just to kind of piggyback, sometimes you got to make an example out of said fighter in that case. And we've seen it in the NBA with players, the NFL with domestic abuse and steroids. We're seeing it in baseball with the gambling and whatnot. It's funny because I've argued for years, you need a commissioner, you need to sanction certain things, because I've
Sure.
always have a problem, and I mention it on broadcast and I get hammered, but the film doesn't lie. The scoring is so skewed, it's so subjective. Everyone sits there, you're not allowed to say the guy got robbed, but sometimes it's like, come on, Like, what are we watching? I never sit there and say the right fighter won. I don't believe that. Just get the score right. And it drives me. I mean, we can have another show for another day, but again, it just drives me batty how we have to cut down on the banned substances, right? We got to make example of some of these fighters as well.
To me, like I said, I'm a big believer in this country. I'm a bit, obviously not a perfect country, but I'm a big believer in the premise of it, innocent till proven guilty.
Right, right.
A big believer of that, we can make mistakes and get another opportunity. So I don't know how far, like I said, lifetime ban, I don't know, maybe that's too
Right,
strong,
right.
but at least maybe
Yeah.
at least a couple years, especially if you knowingly and you got caught in that round. And give guys second opportunities. And I think everybody deserves a second opportunity. This is the United States of America, obviously. But like you said, there's got to be
Fine
something,
line, man.
especially with these, and sometimes, like you said, with the judging, to me, it's just the criteria is not that high or hard. Who's forcing the fight?
Right.
Who's landing
The cleaner
the better
shots.
punches? Who's
Yep.
throwing the more punches? And then a lot of times, and even then, I tell people, okay, even with the cleaner shots, and this should be brought up to the judges. Okay, if I land a clean shot and I touch it like this, I did nothing, right? It's a clean shot,
Right.
didn't. But the other guy hit you like this, just on the side. It didn't land clean, but it went here, and you're getting buckled like this.
Again,
Who's
buckled
doing
in.
the more damaging of the punches?
Well, you would say in that case, right? You're talking about the quality of the shots as opposed to the quantity
Yeah, but
of
I'm
the
just saying,
shots.
some guys, he hits a guy barely like this, and he's buckling. Another guy's going like this, and and yet the guy, to me, he maybe he's not lining the precise punch, but he hit him. He's getting buckled. He's throwing more punches. He's actually touching him more with those types of punches.
Should be getting
You know,
around.
and to me, that would be the hardest type of fight to probably score. And even then, you shouldn't have that big of a problem to score it. So I
Sometimes
don't get it sometimes.
sometimes I wonder what the hell they're watching, man. The margins are different. I mean, I'm like, this is ridiculous. How are you scoring it like this? And then, Bernard Hopkins told me this years ago, man, as soon as I go in someone's backyard, I know I'm giving up 2 rounds. I mean, and
Yeah.
that's and I see it on the local
Well,
circuit.
and the other thing that I think needs to be brought to the attention, I think that really is remiss, is a lot of times what I think needs to be done with these judges is you got to be really analytical of things, because it's human nature again, and we got the element of human nature with these judges. So a guy goes out and he dominates round one. I mean, he just dominates it. He comes out, he dominates round two, and they give it. He dominates round three. I mean, it's not even close. Then all of a sudden, maybe even just destroys them in round four. Now round five comes, and the other guy that won the first four, dominating, actually probably won that round, but the other guy got a little closer. He made it pretty close, but still, are you analyzing? And I guess it's human nature. How many times I know these guys are giving that guy that round,
Mm-hmm.
yet you still didn't win the round. Now all of a sudden we get in round seven, and the guy gets a knockdown. Now it's a 10-8.
10-8 round.
Now you're wondering, how the fuck did we get into excuse my language? How did we
I
get
don't know.
into
You're good. You're good. You're good.
how did we
You're
get
good.
into a
We
situation
talk
where
raw on double jab. You have
yeah,
to
but
let it fly.
so how do you get into a situation
Yeah.
where the score is like this, and that a lot of times that happens, and what they got to do is don't give sympathy rounds. Did he win the round or did he not win the round?
Yeah.
Period.
You got to be clear. You got to be clear as a bell, and you're absolutely right.
Yeah,
And
it is what it is.
yeah, you can't have that swaying the judges with the crowd. And of course, by the way, do we have opponents lined up for the Twins yet, or is that still?
Not to my knowledge. They haven't told me anything to my knowledge with them yet, so we'll see how that plays out. But as part of the management team, what I've said to them is get them in this fight here, whatever we can do, a good level of competition, obviously, get them into a 10-rounder, and from that point on, I think they're ready to go. Put them in with whoever that they deem necessary. They're ready to go for anybody at 122 pounds.
Well, again, they'll have an opportunity May 31st at the Convention Center, the Caribe Royale Hotel. Box Lab Promotions presents a Night of Champions. Don't forget, you can catch the fight exclusively on DAZN if you're live in Orlando area. Visit Ticketmaster.com. Click the link in our show notes right now for tickets. The legendary, the well-spoken, a little juice, a little feistiness Bob Santos. And that's what we need. We need that. We need that raw opinion. You can't hold back. This is the friggin' sport of boxing. We're
Oh,
not gentlemen. We're gladiators. We're warriors.
No, no political correctness for me. I'm gonna tell you what's on my mind, what I think, what I believe, what it is. And you're not happy with it, that's okay.
You can take a while. Hey, listen, I'm the same way. Whether it rubs people the wrong way or not, the film doesn't lie. You have to call it the way you see it. Bob, appreciate you jumping on Double Jab for a couple moments. Best of luck going forward. We hope we can get you back on again.
Yeah, like the old saying, right? We can agree to disagree.
Correct. And you have the last word, the body shot right there. Thank you, my friend.
Hey, follow us at Bob Santos Boxing.
There you have it.
God bless you.